You've probably heard the mantra, evolve or die. Well, it's the stark truth. In business, you either evolve, thrive, or die. Well, in this edition of Business Connect, your hour of insights and inspiration, I bring you conversations with a marketing expert who tells us and takes us into the world of what he calls the challenger mindset and challenger brains. How do you ensure that in spite of all that we've gone through in 2020, 2021 and beyond will present you with a field that you can harvest. And in the hustle, we will bring you the story of a medical doctor and his wife going into the business of hospitality, making some sumptuous chicken wings. Yeah, you heard me right, chicken wings. But in the digital world, we will bring you Roots Digital. And these guys are using technology to make sure that you and I can do the things we do normally. There's a lot of insights in this show today, and I hope you stick around till the end. This year has been described by some as a period of hyper-VUCA that is volatile, is unpredictable, it's complex and ambiguous. The businesses that have survived to date will be looking to do better and thrive in the future. What do you think they ought to do in terms of looking back at the last year to prep themselves for going forward?
Well, it's not that simple, and I don't claim to be somebody who can actually look into a crystal ball and tell you what to do. Nobody really knows what we're looking at right now. Even for us in the developing economies, when you see the advanced economies go deeper into uncertainty, you need to make sure that you rethink about your level of optimism. However, we remain optimistic for those of us in business and even governments. You do not have a choice. But what I would say is that, in my personal opinion, I think we've been resourced. That's the word I would use. We've been resourced for this era in terms of the technological advances that has been around for a couple of years, in terms of the advances in artificial intelligence, for example, advances in digital technology, generally speaking, all the way from mobile devices to 5G potentially coming, and as well as all the benefits of the data that is available to be analyzed by all the tools that are available to us. But the biggest driver of all this is us humans and our ability to adapt, and we're here today as a race, as a species, because we survived and adapted to our environment over the years. And so in the same vein, I expect that we would tap into the resources available to us right now. And as we have seen in the pace at which the vaccines have been developed, remember 20 years ago, the human genome was decoded. And it took the power of technology to do that speedily at that time, 20 years ago. As soon as the virus genome was decoded, we opened the door for its solution, the vaccine generation. And that's how come we've been able to do this quick job at getting a vaccine. I'm saying that to connect back to my point about the fact that we have been resourced in advance of this pandemic. And so we have to go back into that treasure of resource we have and tap into it. So what we have to do, governments, civil society, businesses, is to look back at what we've got that we haven't really used fully yet. When your back is against the wall, you look from within the resources you have and try to optimize and appropriate those resources for your survival. And like you rightly said, you don't just want to survive, you want to thrive. So there are certain behaviors that businesses, governments, and society in general would have to adopt in order not only to survive the day, but to prepare to thrive and to recover from the losses of the kind of situation we find ourselves in.
You know, you mentioned that we have survived as a race, as a species, and it speaks to a number of things that I will attempt to try and sum up in one word: resilience.
Right. Absolutely.
Resilience is important in business, but it takes different forms. I mean, somebody's resilience might be to renegotiate their supply chain, restructure it,
Yes.
to cut down costs.
Yeah.
Someone's resilience might be to actually jettison some human capital and free up some cost and plow back into the business. What would you say would be some of the key things that businesses might have to look at to put their best foot forward and stand a chance of a rebound?
So human capital, rightly put, is one of the key drivers. So the importance of people have risen dramatically to businesses especially, and even to governments and societies. Our lives are at stake as we speak. We are actually fighting for our survival. This pandemic is an existential threat to the human race, literally. And we're drawing on our resource of advancements that we have in our arsenal. We're drawing out of that arsenal to fight back and survive. And so again, it is people. It is people that learn. It's people that advance science and technology. It's people that shape the use of that science and technology for survival. So it's people. Human capital has become very crucial. Just keeping your people healthy and alive has become very critical for most businesses. And it's been very interesting to find out how people could work remotely from their offices and probably do far more work in a day. And so productivity has improved. Meeting attendance on virtual tools like Zoom and Teams and so on has shown that perhaps we should have been using these technologies to our advantage. You know, so it's people, number one. Number two, be processes. It's processes that are enhanced by technology. Are tools that we have had. Tools like video conferencing tools that have been there for a long time that we've not used and applied at large scale, at government or governance or at business management level. Those resources have to be infused into our processes as organizations, whether churches or businesses or governments. Our processes need a refix or retooling, tapping into the resources we currently have. So technology has a very big part to play in operational excellence for businesses. And it's important to train the people or reskill the people, as the jargon is, and retool the processes in order to make that leap to recover from the losses that have been incurred.
Okay. You know, PhD globally are big on thought leadership, and I've been, you know, grateful for the opportunity to actually review and read a lot of the material that's been produced. One that comes to mind immediately is Overthrow 2, which was an expose on the traits that businesses, and it's quite interesting that brands must have and take on a certain personality to thrive. And these were called the challenger brands. You know, so if we accept that, first of all, start us off with what the challenger mindset is.
All right.
And then we'll go into what kind of challenger personalities brands need to look at adopting going into 2021.
Right. So our book Overthrow was first done. The first part was done in 2012, and we did a second version of it in 2019. And so 7 years apart, we brought out case studies from across the globe around the adoption of challenger mindsets by brands in putting out their narratives or in their communication strategization in terms of how they want to grow. So what challenger brands are brands that take a stance in the marketplace, either to shape and reshape the category or the entire industry. And these brands are challenging something, not a competitor per se or a person, but they challenge something that they think must change, or something that they think is an opportunity for them to ride on the back of. Sometimes it may be responding to a challenge or a problem. And in response to that problem, you end up benefiting and growing disproportionately versus the rest of the category that you're serving in. So there are very different types of challenger types that we have. The classic one, of course, is the David and Goliath one.
That's right.
The big boy and the underdog. Okay, so we have that type of challenger as one of the options, but there are 9 different other kinds of ways we can tell a challenger story, or we can adopt a challenger strategy. If you are a business, if you are even an individual, and you look at yourself as a brand, you can't adopt a challenger stance in your category or your market. And that stance is not about challenging an individual or somebody, but challenging something that you think must change. And in the times we are in, the types of challenges that really will come into their own are the ones that are purpose-driven, that tend to respond to societal needs, that tend to become brands that we can say are more purposeful, authentic, and more meaningful. And so those brands respond to the pandemic, for example, with empowerment and resourcing of people's response that they want to put out, like maybe health care responses, or allowing people to draw on local resources to build brands or to build products. And so there's one that's called the local hero. The local hero actually is a challenger that taps local insight, local strengths, and appropriates that for the benefit of the local people. So it may be as simple as just using cassava to brew beer, or using sorghum to brew beer, and empowering the local farmer to supply to that factory to brew that beer. Or it could be just starch from cassava that is exported for some other processes in agriculture or some other industry, and so on and so forth. So it's about looking for local strengths and local resources that can respond to a global pandemic, for example, as we're in right now. Now you can't have exports from the big China factory as much as you used to have, because the planes are not flying as frequently. And so you need to look into the local environment and empower the local people to draw the resource, like I tried to say, that we dig deep, we look inside to look at what the local resources are and how we can tap them, from people to processes to all the other things that it can bring to bear on our performance.
You mentioned people and processes. Once you've done your introspection, oftentimes you're faced with the reality of what you ought to do.
Right.
How much of an importance would you say that courage, for example, plays in from introspection to action?
Well, it's important to be courageous if you are trying something new, especially if you want to be a challenger. You have to overcommit. You have to overcommit, and you can only benefit from that challenger stance if you actually are courageous and take a risk to an extent. So challengers take risks on their own businesses. They take risks on their own category. They take risks on how the consumer will even respond to them sometimes. So it's important to be courageous because you are going into uncharted territory. And it's important to recognize that what you are trying to do may not succeed. But then I always say that even rocket science has an element of faith in it. Even though there is the fact of physics, astrophysics at play, there's an element of faith, believing that we would arrive. I'm always intrigued by the fact that there's a lot of applause in the mission control room when that space shuttle actually docks or lands at the destination. I always ask myself, but didn't you know it was going to work before you sent human beings up into the air? What were you thinking?
Yeah.
But they knew they had the physics or the astrophysics worked out, but they also know that something could happen on the road that they probably didn't factor in. And so there's always a risk in everything. But the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. And that's where courage comes in the middle, to put you over the wall.
So businesses have to realign or maybe rethink the way they approach the next year or the next 5 years. Now, we've faced an existential threat with devastating consequences on economies and businesses and lives. Nobody knows what the next year holds.
Yes.
So in this hyper unpredictable space we find ourselves in, beyond rethinking and having a challenger mindset, how do you foresee the businesses that thrive go about it? What are the things that will set the thriving businesses apart from those that will struggle?
Well, what we've learned from the challenger brands that we've studied and that the book Overthrow 2 talks about include some of the things that we take for granted, like being creative and innovative, and that coming from wanting to be effective first before even being efficient. You want to think about the resources you are putting out there and ensure that they will do the job. And if they will do the job, then you deploy them. But it takes a bit of courage again to even be creative. When you generate ideas out of insight from maybe data analysis, you want to make sure that those ideas will be effective first. Sometimes, because we're in difficult times, we will look at efficiency. How much will it cost me per head? How much will it cost me per 1,000 people? And so on and so forth. But the research we've done on the behavior of the challenger brand says that they actually put effectiveness first before efficiency. Because if you're going somewhere, if you're even going on the moon, you want to arrive on the moon safely first before you find out how long did it take me to arrive there. How much did it cost me to arrive there? And so you need to be creative, but at the same time you need to be rational about the decisions you are taking and the strategies you are having in place. So it's very important to think about effectiveness of our activities or our strategies. And interestingly, by looking at effectiveness first, you take care of efficiency indirectly. Because effective strategies or very creative and innovative approaches tend to deliver disproportionate return on investment than the usual. Okay, so you can't continue to grow single digit in 2021 onwards. If you get into spaces that you can grow double digit year on year, then you are in a place where you can talk about recovering by 2023, for example. And you know what? Technology is not slowing down. As a matter of fact, what COVID has done is to accelerate and speed up maturation of some of the technologies that we've been testing and trying out and have been slow at fully deploying. And so if you don't, others will use that technology.
That's right.
All right. So you want to think first of how effective you will be tapping the technologies that are available. Because I always say that in a time like this, we can actually take efficiency for granted to an extent. There are devices, technologies, there's artificial intelligence, there's a lot of data that can be crunched faster. Just like we've actually got vaccines out within less than a year of a pandemic, and they are at 95% effectiveness. That tells you that we can actually take efficiency for granted because the tools exist to power that effectiveness. So one of the key things we picked out is that we need to think creatively and focus on innovation.
Okay, creativity and innovation.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we'll go more into the challenger mindset and what your business ought to do to ensure that come 2021 and beyond, you're thriving and you're making progress closer to where you've always wanted to see that business. This is the big conversation on Business Connect. And my guest is Mr. Bright Lajapo. He's a marketing communications professional with oodles of experience, and he is the managing director of PhD Ghana. Stay with us. Welcome back to Business Connect with me, Inshira Ado, and this is the big conversation segment with my guest, Mr. Bright Lajapo. He is a marketing communications professional with tons of experience, sharing with us what businesses ought to do to thrive in these uncertain times beyond 2020. Now, the challenger mindset is an intriguing concept. It's like one of those things that's always been there, but you never recognized it until it was pointed out to you. Speaks of courage, resilience, and creativity, innovation. These are hallmarks of the human race.
Right.
But in business, and in especially times such as this, your study has shown that these are tried and tested principles, right, mindsets and strategies that have worked. Does it always work for just big business, or this little guy like me, or the startup down the road can tap into some of these and grow?
So the things we have put out in the book as commonalities, we actually call them commonalities. Right. So it's a bit of science. So you do the analysis of the trend and the data, and you see some things running through commonalities. And they are law-like. They are like, it happens like laws of nature, really, or laws of science. So it doesn't matter your size, it applies. It's a principle. So we've distilled these, and we have case studies that point us to the fact that whether big or small, all brands can actually benefit from adopting a challenger mindset or challenger strategy.
That reminds me, in the book, I think it's a Dutch chocolate company.
Chocolonely, yeah.
Yeah, Chocolonely,
yeah.
Right. They are not a large organization in comparison to maybe a Hershey's or Mars and co. But they've demonstrated that this actually works.
Yeah, so that's a missionary mindset. They have a mission. A mission is about how, for example, in the area of sourcing and supply chains, we need to become more ethical around how the things we sell, the things we market, are ethically produced. So they picked up on cocoa, and they are into chocolate. So they picked up on how cocoa comes into the factory and going back to the farms and some of the practices on the farms. And West Africa comes under the spotlight because that's where the biggest cocoa farms are, and we supply the world. And there are practices, and it's a bit controversial, but they picked up on it and said, okay, if children, for example, may be on farms instead of being in school, is there something we want to let continue? How can we balance it up to ensure that these children are getting education and not being exploited? You know, so they come in with that mission, a sense of mission, but they do it with an attitude, and that attitude makes them stand out. So people buy that bar of chocolate with a sense of mission, not just for the taste of the chocolate, but that by buying that chocolate, they are part of that mission of changing the possibility of some abuse, of some deprived people somewhere that may not get the best. And it can apply to the way other things are sourced.
You know, if you look at some of the campaigns we've seen rolled out over the years, like Buy Ghana, Buy Made in Ghana,
Right.
Buy Indigenous, I mean, that itself is a mission. It's a clarion call. So a business that wants to take the challenger mindset and be a missionary can tap into that and say, okay, well, we are going to buy Ghana, so we're going to make sure that end to end, everything we do is sourced and produced here in Ghana.
Yes.
Into the end product that you're buying.
Yes.
And that's something that can set you apart from others in the category.
Absolutely. And we have a big frame called Ghana Beyond Aid. And within that frame, there's a space for small and big, missionary-minded brands. Brands that want something to change, something that is not working well for us as a society, as a people, or as an economy. You want to make your contribution for that to change. You take a stance and move accordingly, and you stand out for that. So small brands, we've seen that they have attitude, and that attitude is more important to them than their audience size. And so they take on a whole category, and they punch above their weight, and eventually they get to stand out. And once they stand out, and they're authentic at the things they do, there's a huge following. We've all seen in this year, I mean, interestingly, how Black Lives Matter movement was thrust forward much more, because we're in an era where we need a lot of empathy. And if a brand doesn't show that, or a government doesn't show that, or a society doesn't show that, then there's a question to be asked.
That's right.
You know, so there's a lot of activism, even in the brand space, just like in a general society.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in your study of the brands and spotting the commonalities, what other things did you find?
We've also seen that there are brands that have put technology at the back and put humanity at the front. So one Southeast Asian colleague says, you digitize but humanize. Digitize but humanize. So you let the technology take the back seat, not the front seat, and you humanize technology. So there's a lot of technology at play right now.
Sure.
And there are ethical issues that are even coming up around how advertising is personalized and targeted, at people, because it's possible to do that with artificial intelligence at the back end. But if you even target somebody and it is not something that you do in an irritating manner, or you do in a more relevant way and more friendly tone. So there are robots, we call them chatbots, that are talking to us on the internet, within chatbots, or within, if you make a phone call, you can never be sure whether it's a human being that's responding to you, to that bank, or to that insurance company, and so on. And for the sake of safety, in these times, we found out these technologies have come in very handy. Mobile money technology, for example, is using a lot of artificial intelligence at the back end to power what goes on, to the extent that microloans, microinsurance is thriving, because now we can know the people who pay back their loans on time, quietly. At the back end, as you pay your loan, the data is collected. The artificial intelligence is monitoring people.
And computing your credit scoring while
credit
all of
scoring
this is happening.
Whether you are a market woman or a trotro driver or a shoe shine who took that loan, they know you paid on time or you didn't pay on time. They will give you another loan again. So there's a human benefit. And so what these brands, small brands have done and big brands have done is to put the human benefit at the front and let the technology hide behind, but not put the technology at the front to the disadvantage of the human being.
Just for me, this is how the pin dropped, that when you need a loan, you're not thinking about how you get it. You need a loan. So the technology is enabling the meeting of a need that you, the human, have. But the brand is not saying that, we're using technology to do this. It's saying, we're taking care of you.
We are human beings. We can connect with you.
Exactly.
We have empathy, But at the same time, the technology is bringing some justice, some discipline, some order, and structure to the whole conversation. And so that's one of the key things we found. Another thing we found is that it's not enough to be differentiated or to be different. It's important to be distinctive. So brands that stand out of the clutter do well, because there's so much in every space now. There's a lot of democratization because of technology. And so one technology can be applied in so many ways, and it's so accessible that so many people can play in that space. So you are likely to be crowded out, especially if you're a small player. And so you want to think about, how can I stand out of the crowd? How do I not just be different from the other person, but stand out of the crowd? Distinctiveness is vital for your survival.
Distinctiveness is vital for survival. So it's not okay to just be different, but you must go one step further and be distinct, stand out in the category.
Absolutely.
And that's how you thrive. Now, we've just got a little bit of time left before we wrap this conversation up. Say I've been able to identify my challenger personality. I've got my strategy going. How does the personality find meaning across the entire organization, and it's not something that is resident in the heart and minds of the ESCO or the leader of the organization, for example?
Right. So I think it's important that organizations that adopt a certain mission or mindset or take a certain stance overcommit to communicating. In fact, someone said you have to over-communicate. You constantly have to reinforce that mindset, because mindset change is far more difficult than skill set acquisition. It's easy for people to go to a course and get a skill set and apply it the next day. But if you're changing ways of thinking, it takes a lot longer. And you need to do reminding. And you need to make sure that there are cues in the organization that remind people that this is who we are, this is what we will do, this is what we stand for. And when it brings the benefit, and what we've seen is that it brings growth and benefit, that benefit must be talked about. You must not just do the story, but also tell the story. So in the first book, we actually talked about how to tell challenging stories, the narrative. So there must be strategies around the communication space that you're using both internally in the organization as well as out there in your communication strategies, PR, advertising, and all the community activities that you may be doing on the ground, online, on air. You surely need to craft your communication in such a way that not only do your internal customers, your staff, get empowered, but your customers also get empowered. And the customer experience is connected to what you stand for and who you are and what you want to challenge in a category. Interesting.
If you say have an organization where unfortunately you're having to, run very fast and get things right very quickly, but say you do not have, for the want of a better expression, the structures already in place, where would you recommend one start from in getting organization-wide adoption of a mindset?
Okay, so if you see the structures in place, you're probably talking about the kind of communication or the kind of organizational structure that will enable that challenger mindset to be brought to life.
That's right.
Right. Okay. So you definitely want to start off by putting out the essentials. What are the things that are essential for that challenger mindset? What is it that is critical for you to do for it to be brought to life? You major on that, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that. And you go and get the resources. If they are not internally available, you have to outsource some of them. And so your people are galvanized around the essentials. So they are, in the book, we have always outlined the essentials, whether they are communications behavior essentials, or their marketing essentials, or business-wide essentials, or people-driven essentials. You need to identify what is essential. And it may vary from market to market, So you want to do that introspection and say that, and sometimes you may want to test out a hypothesis. You could test out the hypothesis that you say you want to stand for by asking for consumers to give information to you, or going out there if it is a community service, you need to do data collection and prove your own hypothesis, right or wrong. Then you know the key essentials that are the drivers of the attainment.
Take to go forward.
Yeah.
Well, Bright, thank you so much for making time to
Anytime.
Allow us feed on your expertise and experience.
It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be bringing you the hustle and digital business. Now, in the hustle, it wasn't enough to go to medical school, but a man's desire to bring people together has seen the development of a brand that provides some of the sumptuous chicken wings you'll ever eat. And in the digital business segment, we bring you the story of Roots Digital, a team of passionate digital professionals who are looking for ways to use technology to answer everyday challenges. This is still Business Connect with me, Inshirado.